So, as this is part of our ongoing lecture series, as you know, on the book The Good News by Humberto de Campos, an extraordinary book of these behind-the-scenes moments of the gospel that he sheds light in what was happening before, what was happening after, on the days of very important passages. So it amplifies our vision. It's almost like going Google Maps and zooming out a few clicks, and we get the whole landscape to understand. And this is a great chapter on love and renunciation. And as we go through it, I wanted to suggest that we do a format that you feel totally at ease to ask questions, make your comments, let's make it as interactive as possible so you don't feel like a lecture and you don't fall asleep as a result. So I didn't put the entire chapter here because I feel sometimes it's too much text, but I got the highlights and I got some cool photos from the internet to go along with it. And we'll reflect on some of the main teachings that he's talking about. So, Humberto de Campos sets the scene for us in the first paragraph of the chapter to make our imaginations acclimate as to where they are. And he says it in a beautiful way. He says, "The shroud of the night fell softly on the landscapes of Capernaum." So this is at the end of the day. The sun has set. After one of the greatest popular gatherings at the lake, Jesus returned to Peter's house in his very company. So this was one of the greatest gatherings, probably one of the biggest in the beginning there, right? And they come together back to Peter Simon's house. Through his divine word, Jesus had offered luminous clarifications upon the commandments of Moses. So we can imagine the simple, hardworking Jewish people of Galilee, Capernaum, and all of the cities around, Magdalene, getting together to hear a prophet that they knew was an important prophet. And some even believed was the Messiah, right? And hearing the luminous commandments of Moses, which they would ordinarily get from the doctors of the law, the Pharisees, right? Now imagine the contrast in the way Jesus would explain it versus perhaps some of the doctors of the law and the Pharisees focusing a lot on the letter, focusing a lot on the rules, and maybe depriving some of the essential beauty of the hidden teachings of the commandments of Moses that Jesus had access and was able to share. So we can tell by this opening that it was a sublime afternoon, right? That everyone was probably left there in ecstasy, in bliss, feeling so elated. Simon, however, doesn't seem to have been in this state of joy because he's walking back home with Jesus. His state of mind is, we're going to psychoanalyze Peter, by the way, today, okay? So he was pensive, as if he remained doubtful within his heart. So his inner state is an inner state there. And all of this that we're going to psychoanalyze on Peter, we're going to reflect it back to our own inner world and identify the moments that we feel the same way, right? So he was uneasy, he was pensive, he was doubtful. That's one of the greatest paintings there of the lake. This is the subject that had Simon Peter uneasy, pensive, doubtful within his heart. Can anyone tell what this looks like? A wedding, right? A very luxurious, very opulent, majestic looking, beautiful party. Like the ones we see today, with flowers, right? And we see, and this is by, I have the caption is going to appear here. It's from a painter from the 1500s, and this is at the Louvre Museum. And you can see, yeah?
Just like
yeah, please.
Quick note on that. So this is like a huge, huge painting. It's, I think, maybe the size of this wall here.
Really?
And it's in the Louvre, and it's right, so if this is the wall where it is, over there you have Mona Lisa.
Oh, wow.
So it's really right there, and some people don't even look at this painting because everybody's looking at Mona Lisa, and then they turn and go out, but like It's
Wow.
very big. It's right across.
Thanks for sharing that. Next time I go to the Louvre, I want to pay attention to it because we just rushed to the Mona Lisa. And it's a painting this big. And everyone is trying to take photos of it. Meanwhile, there's this amazing work of art on the other side. You see, everyone's ignoring the wedding feast. So this is the wedding celebration at Cana, which at the time, weddings would last for days and days and days, right? And we see here in the middle, the radiant, glowing, bright figure that the artist painted of the face of Jesus, sitting down next to the groom and the bride, and everyone around having a great time, enjoying themselves. You can see so many people eating and talking and exchanging good times, right? This is the subject of Peter's concern. As he's walking with Peter, just the two of them, Jesus and Peter, they're walking back home at the end of this. Jesus notices there's something up with Peter. So he kindly queries, kindly asks Peter. He basically says, kindly queried by the master of the apostles, clarify. So master's like, what's wrong, Peter? Are you okay? What's going on? Then Peter says, in the light of your teachings, Lord, how should we interpret your first manifestation, turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana? Was it not a worldly party? Wouldn't wine have led to the promotion of drunkenness and gluttony? Right? So Peter was present in this wedding party, which effectively took place. Right? I like to say that everything that happened in the gospel can be a representation of what happens within us in our own kingdom of heaven, but it also is something that actually took place externally, right? So do you guys remember this passage when he turns water into wine? So he's in a wedding party of his friends, and they run out of wine. And his mother approaches Jesus, and she's wondering what to do. And he says, my time has not yet come. But then she has this insight when he answers her that. And she turns to the servants of the party and says, do everything that he says. Then he sees that are 6 huge empty empty jars that would hold between 20 to 30 gallons each. They were all empty. And they were meant for the Jewish rites of purification, the purification of the water. So he orders the servants, fill all of these with water to the brim. And so they did. Then take it to the host of the party, the groom. And so they did. And when the host gets and begins to drink, he realizes that it's not water, it's wine. And he makes a comment. This is great wine. Unlike everybody else who serves the good wine first, and then after people get drunk, they just serve the bad wine. You did differently. You left the good wine to the end. This is very symbolic, right? But there's also a teaching being the good wine here versus the bad wine just for drunkenness, right? So this is the context. And it says at the end, this was the first sign of Jesus, and it officially marked the beginning of his ministry of teaching the gospel. This is where it all begins, at a party, which is very symbolic, at a place of joyful gathering amongst friends. Friendship is also a key term we're going to talk about here today. So, Jesus understood the scope of Peter's inquiry. Remember, let's psychoanalyze the emotional, psychological state of Peter as he's walking with Jesus and he's asking these questions. He understood that's a valid concern, right, Master? You're the Messiah here. You're an example for us to follow. You turn water into wine. Isn't that going to promote more, party behavior? So he understood the scope of his inquiry, smiled and said, Simon, do you know the joy of serving a friend? Let's think about the way he asks this question. If he asks that, it's probably because he sensed that in Peter's heart, he had not yet discovered what truly feels like the joy of serving a friend. Let's see how, if this theory makes sense. Peter did not answer. He stayed quiet. He was pensive. The master continued, the wedding at Cana was a symbol of our union on the earth, on this planet, not in the spirit realm, not discarnated. A symbol on the union with Jesus here on earth, our reincarnation. There, the wine was the joy. The wine symbolizes the joy with which I wish to seal the existence of the kingdom of God. Where? Within the heart. This is so beautiful. Not out there, not as a destination for after we die. Within the heart. I am with my friends and I love them all. The affections of the soul, Simon, are mysterious ties. Even Jesus would say that to the apostle. Mysterious ties. Even Jesus couldn't really comprehend the mysterious ties that leads all of these souls through friendship, through bonds of affinity and affection. And because of those, the propulsion, the motivation, the encouragement, the strength that it gives people when they unite as friends, that is such a powerful lever to lead us to God. Right? To deepen ourselves in the kingdom of God within us. To be closer to God in thought and in feeling. Why? Because of the joy of friendship. The joy of friendship, right? So, even there's a passage in the gospel where Jesus says to the apostles, this is towards the end when he feels that the testimony of the crucifixion is about to come, he begins to weep because he feels sad he's going to say goodbye to his friends. And he says a passage, and then he goes out to pray. He retreats and goes out by himself to the mountains to pray. He says, walk while you still have the light. And that's very beautiful, because when he says that, walk while you still have the light, what he means is walk while you're still incarnated. And you have the ability of the five senses to guide you as a light for growth. Why? Because after we return to the spirit realm, it's just debriefing, assessment, reviews of what we did. While we still have the light of our five senses, while we have this physical body, we can continue to walk. Over there, depending on what we've constructed here, we might not have that light, right? We can be in a cocoon shielded by the own creations of our thoughts and feelings. We may not have that light. So he says, walk while you still have the light. So I put this painting, which is by this artist here, Deb Menard, called The Laughing Jesus, because for me, that's the joy of serving a friend. To be laughing with friends like this, in this spontaneous, unrestrained, unconstrained way, seems to feel like what Jesus was talking to Peter and what he identified in Peter. Because remember, Peter didn't understand that teaching. He was there. He didn't notice what Jesus was truly doing in spirit. Had he done that, had he had access to that ability, he wouldn't have been hesitant, uneasy, questioning the reason why Jesus did that, right? Would you agree? And when Jesus asked, do you know the joy of serving a friend? Perhaps Peter wasn't really well versed in that art yet, right? He continues to give the example to Peter, and he says, let us sanctify our affections, providing our friends with maximum joy. May our hearts be a bright room where they feel tranquil and blissful. Let us always have new joys that comfort them. Let us never contaminate the source of their sympathy for us and each other, right? With the shadow of grief. It's a very powerful word. With the shadow of grief. The most beautiful hours of life are the ones that we employ in loving them, our friends, and enriching their innermost satisfaction. So, this is the most beautiful joy of life. To be incarnated is to when we are amongst friends and we are celebrating our friendship in spontaneous ways, right? Doesn't that feel good? And the word grief, I had to find the definition so we can meditate on, is something that is sorrow, trouble, annoyance, a burden. From the old French, grever, literally to place a burden on somebody. Right? So sometimes we'll have, hey, how you doing? Oh, and then the person begins. Now, when we're truly, truly close as friends, we do that because we trust that person and we vent, we decompress our emotions with that person. And that person is going to give us the brutal honesty back because they love us. The brutal honesty, which won't hurt because it's coming from a friend. Fair enough? When we are really talking about those close, close friendships, right? We're not talking about the acquaintances and the societal connections we make out of the sake of having to fulfill our other obligations in this material body. But true friendships that are forged with the ties of the Spirit. It doesn't even have to be in a religious place. I'm talking from the ties of the Spirit because we truly enjoy each other's company and we have a constructive relationship that takes the spiritual nature over the animal one. Fair enough? Do you guys identify those in your life? Those feel good, right? It's not a lot. I can count in the hands of one finger. But even if you don't speak with them for years, when you talk to them, it's like you just spoke with them yesterday and you feel at ease, intimate, no fear. That's what that means, right? You guys heard that definition? I think I mentioned it many times. Intimacy comes from in temare. Temor is fear. In temare is without fear. It's from Latin. So when we have intimacy, when we feel intimate with people, we are interacting with them without fear. And that for me is this: unarmed, fully vulnerable, fully spontaneous, fully giving and generous. So far so good. Any questions, comments? So I like this photo. I've recycled this photo in a few lectures I've done here because it's such a beautiful showing of abundant giving from the heart in the symbol of water coming from a spring that never dries up, and it cascades into a waterfall into the ocean. So this symbol of fertility, of life, coming from the heart. Now, you guys remember what Jesus was telling to Peter, right? So you think Peter was convinced? Oh, I feel good, Master. I received. Now I connect with what you really did. No. He continues, showing some discomfort caused by the counsels. Do you remember what Jesus was saying just now? He says, let us show affections. Let us give all that joy to them. Oh, my God, what did I do? Sorry, guys. He was saying, I just want to come back here. He says the joys and the giving. He was renewing the heart all the time of our friends. So can you imagine not only hearing these words spoken, but from the mouth of the Christ, carrying all that love and all of that wisdom? How impactful must those words have been, right? Here, this part. The most beautiful hours of life are the ones we employ in loving them, loving our friends. Our hearts be a bright room where they feel tranquil and blissful. Let's renew, have more joy so we can comfort them. Never contaminate the source of the sympathy with grief, right? This is Jesus in a moment of enthusiasm giving the comfort of his words to Peter. And this is how Peter's not able yet to get out of this mindset. He still showed discomfort caused by those counsels. Before I continue, why would these words cause discomfort? Let's bring it to ourselves. I can identify. For example, if Jesus was telling me to do all these things, and I've done them in the past, and I was hurt, and I was betrayed, I would have been a little uncomfortable hearing this abundant show of joy and giving to your friends and your heart, right? Was that perhaps what the discomfort was coming from? Why would Peter still be discomforted? He says, how should we proceed when friends don't understand us or when they repay us with ingratitude? So the man was hurt. His heart was violated by a friend in the past or by somebody he trusted, and legitimately he was hurt, right? He's traumatized by it. So he's not very secure in just opening up and letting his light shine and giving that energy abundantly to his friend. So this is Jesus' answer. He says, Jesus placed a lucid gaze on him and responded, Peter, true and sincere love never expects rewards. Renunciation is its foundation, as the act of giving is the essence of its life. So the act of giving is the essence of renunciation. So when we are renouncing, we are giving. That's what he says up there, right? Renunciation is the foundation of true and sincere love, which is the one that never expects rewards. Renunciation is the foundation of that. And the act of giving is the essence of renunciation. Can you see how he builds that? The ability to feel great affection is already a treasure in itself. He's almost like saying, the joy you felt when you gave, that alone was so ecstatic, so beautiful, so nourishing, that you've got your reward already. Whatever comes afterwards, just like the parable of the sower, right? He doesn't look back to check where the seeds fall. That's up to God. That's up to the other person's free will. But I felt that immense joy in the giving without it expecting anything. That ability to feel great affection is already a treasure in itself. I also read this in the sense of already an acquisition, a milestone that our spirit has achieved, like a virtue, right? We've all achieved many virtues. We wouldn't be reincarnated during this time on the earth if we had not achieved a lot of merits. That's a fact. That's not fake news. We wouldn't be here if we had not achieved a lot of merits. We wouldn't be given a body. It's that simple. We would be in line, waiting. So there's a lot in us that we have already achieved as virtues and conquered milestones. The ability to feel great affection when we are doing the giving, when we're doing the sharing. For instance, just talking in public about something we're passionate about, if that gives me an ability to feel great, is already a treasure. How people respond to it, if that changes, if 10 days from now you get like a letter saying that was the worst lecture ever, you guys should fire it, and it changes, it shouldn't take away from my ability to have felt the great affection at the time. That's when the renunciation comes in. We're going to read more about renunciation, which is something of a big challenge for us to understand. You guys follow me so far? How's the room temperature? Let's feel the room. It's comfortable. Not literally, TJ. It's comfortable, right? 64 outside. All right. So now we're going to go into the actual reflection on renunciation. You guys know who Simon of Cyrene is? Simon of Cyrene was that man that was there by Golgotha as Jesus was walking with a very heavy cross after getting beaten up and whipped. And Jesus is carrying the cross. And there's a moment where his strength can't hold it anymore and he falls over with the cross. Immediately, Roman soldiers just yank Simon from the crowd, say, you, go there and help carry the cross. So he's ordered to carry the cross, and he carries it for a little bit, then he returns it to Jesus. Emmanuel, in the book Daily Bread, in lesson 103, has a whole conversation about this passage of Simon and Cyrene and talks about our sense of responsibilities and how do we feel about undertaking our responsibilities. The title is The Cross and Discipline. That's the title of the chapter. And there are two passages that he says here that are quite striking. He says, many people confuse discipline with spiritual illumination. Spiritual illumination is that kingdom of God in the heart within, right? It's all based on feelings, feeling. And he says, Even today, most men and women accept, remember, we sometimes equate the word renunciation with acceptance, right? We use renunciation and acceptance a lot. Most men and women accept the obligations inherent to their own duties because they are forced to. Kind of like Simon of Cyrene. So when Jesus says, if you wish to follow me, deny yourselves first, carry your cross. Take up your cross and carry it. So Emmanuel says, how many of us are not really taking up our cross and following Jesus, but we are theoretically reading and studying and doing this and doing that, but just theoretically. We haven't yet found the spiritual illumination to reach the renunciation, to carry that cross with joy. And that's the key difference. The cross with the wine or the cross with vinegar. Do I carry my cross with wine, symbolically, or do I carry my cross with vinegar? Simon either was carrying with vinegar, or he's like, God, I don't know who this guy is. Here, I got ordered to, I got to do it, otherwise they're going to kill me, right? That's how the Romans rolled. So, how do we take this to the teaching in the good news? Let's look at the word renunciation. So, the definition in the dictionary is the act of rejecting something, especially if it's something that the renouncer has previously enjoyed or endorsed. So it's something that we love, it's something that we like, but our spiritual nature, our conscience, our higher self, our wisdom told us, in this moment, even though it's something I like, I should renounce. But I will renounce it with joy. Now, that's the key difference, right? He continues. Remember, I actually repeated the same paragraph for emphasis. He said, Peter, true and sincere love never expects rewards. Renunciation is its foundation. The act of giving is the essence of its life, the life of renunciation. The ability to feel great affection is already a treasure in itself. And then he says the following, the understanding of a friend should be the greatest reward for us. How does that tie with renunciation? When the friend doesn't understand us, right? Or when the friend hurts us, right? Or when the family member, whoever. How are you guys feeling? Any insights to share? Any questions to ask? Any agreements or disagreements? All right, we'll keep going then. Okay, a lot of text, but we'll go slowly. Stay awake. All right. He continues, when the light of understanding is postponed, I think that's so beautiful. Because remember, he says those are mysterious ties that leads us to God. The bonds of affection are mysterious ties that we don't even understand why our affinities bring us together. But God knows. And when Jesus says postponed, is because he knows it's the will of the Father that all of us, adversaries, enemies, will reunite again, will reconcile, will forgive each other, and will become friends again. Because enemies very likely were friends once, right? Sometimes they were indifferent people that attacked us, and they show up at our door and we don't know who they are, they attack us. Okay, now they're my enemy, I need to get revenge. But many times is previous love ties, previous affinity ties that went south, that went vinegar, and now we need to rescue them. So when he says, when the light of understanding is postponed in the spirit of those we love, we must remember that we have the sacred understanding of God that knows our purest resolutions. So our conscience knows when we acted in the best of our intentions, and that's the understanding that God has. We feel that understanding from God. We're not alone in that moment. Even if all our friends in the world were converted one day into our adversaries, or even into our tormentors, So not just adversaries, but literally a tormentor, somebody that inflicts physical pain, right? Physical, emotional, psychological pain. Today is illegal, physical pain, but at the time they could get away with it more. They could never deprive us of the infinite joy of having given them something. He emphasizes the same point. The ability to feel great affection is a treasure in itself. And the ability to not feel like we were robbed of that infinite joy that once we gave them something. So he's almost reminding us when we are struggling with forgiveness of friends or feeling betrayed, can we transport in our minds the times when we were sharing moments of joy, when we were giving satisfaction to the friends, and we could hear their laughter, and we could hear the silliness, and we reconnect with that beautiful energy. Can we rescue that and bring it to the present so that it can help to heal the wounds? That the light of understanding is no longer here for the time being, right? With his loss, now this is a beautiful moment that Humberto de Campos breaks the narrative of Jesus, and he begins to narrate something that happens. With his lost look in the twilight landscape, where subtle harmonies vibrated, Jesus prophetically pondered. So he already knew. He says, the wine at Cana, the wine of friendship, the joy of friendship, might one day become the vinegar of bitterness. Yet, I will feel nonetheless joy for having drunk it, the vinegar. Remember, he drinks the vinegar in the end. I will feel nonetheless joy for having drunk the vinegar in dedication to those who came to me to seek the love of the Almighty. So Jesus was putting himself behind. His purpose was so burning in his conscience, was so clear, that his purpose of being here spoke much higher than any of his personal feelings, right? And he would drink gladly the wine of vinegar for the sake of his purpose, of the mission, which was those that were coming to him to seek the love of God, right?
Your interpretation enlightens me.
Okay.
But I feel like what he's really saying is, no matter what happens in the future, even if it turns into vinegar, I will still enjoy it as the wine.
Yeah. You know, it's unclear, both in Portuguese or English, what he's really referring to, the wine or the vinegar. In Portuguese, it seems to be that he's referring to the vinegar because of direct object and indirect object. But he will drink it maybe with the same joy as the wine,
I don't
perhaps.
think he's going to drink it later on. He's already drunk it. And we've drunk the wine.
Okay.
We enjoy the wine. And just because you reinterpret it as vinegar, I'm going to keep it as wine.
I support you in that. Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Does that make sense, guys? Because it totally connects with what he was saying before. The joy of giving, feeling that great affection for it, right? And vinegar does taste good. Oh, never mind.
Not as good as wine.
No, I agree. Especially good wine. Imagine this one that came from Jesus. All right. This book, Renunciation, if our friend Adjuston was here, I'm sure he would appreciate that I put this book up because he says it's his favorite book in Spiritism. And of course, the title of the book is the title of the lecture. So of course, I went and did some research on it. It's one of the most beautiful novels that Emmanuel channeled. And it talks about the heroic courage of this spirit, Alcyone, to renounce all of the beauty in the world of Sirius, a star system, a planet much more evolved than the Earth. And because of those mysterious ties that leads us to God, remember? The love that she feels for one man who fell behind in his evolution and didn't progress as fast as she did, and he was still on the Earth making the same mistakes, she put it upon herself, out of love for him, to ask for a chance to go back. And the way it happens is this gentleman that we're referring to is in the spirit realm, in a terrible state because he just finished a failed lifetime of many mistakes. And he feels that he's about to reincarnate again. And he fervently prays for the opportunity to speak to her because he wants to get some counsel and some guidance. His prayers are answered. She comes in spirit and has a one-on-one with him. And it is in that one-on-one that she makes the decision to go back to Sirius and ask for the opportunity, the authorization to reincarnate. And when she does ask them there, they're like, Alcione, you're ready to drink the bitter vinegar, the vinegar of bitterness, something like that, again? Again. Meaning she's done it before. And they're like, you know you're going to expose yourself to a lot of temptations, a lot of risks, because this is a very heavily dense material planet. So the animal nature is going to come. I mean, you got to be exposed to that. Are you okay with that? And they're like trying to convince her, are you sure? You know, like it's almost reckless what you're doing. But she had so much love for the guy that she says yes. And the book is the journey, the book is the journey of her having these heroic struggles through her life, maintaining her faithful conscience to the duties that she came to embrace. And the end of this book, I had forgotten because it had been many, many years since I read. I read again the last chapter. I mean, if this book becomes a movie in Hollywood, people are going to be sobbing in the movie theater. They're not going to be able to get out of their chairs for like 30 minutes. So I want to be those cathartic moments because you would never expect what happens in the end. I really am tempted to tell you, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to spoil it. But it just shows, all right, Chiara, a little hint. Well, she ends up being arrested in a jail because this is during the time of the Inquisition. She was a nun. At the end of her life, she's a nun. There's a lot that happens before, but I'm not going to say. And she agrees to be a Carmelite nun that does a lot of charitable work for the community. So much charitable work that the corrupt priests that would go from convent to pray and abuse sexually of the nuns were so bothered by her behavior because she was able to get the entire community of nuns in that convent to just embrace the world, charity, to help the orphans. And when he arrives there, he finds a way to say she's a traitor, that she's embracing the world and she's not finding enough time to worship God and to be in contemplation inside of a convent, you know. So she's sentenced to this jail for 10 months in Spain, in Madrid, waiting to be heard by the Grand Inquisitor, who we will know is actually him. I know. Oh, I hope this gives you enough motivation to read the book, because it's a great book. So the spiritual dialogues that happen in this moment specifically are quite beautiful. And the way the book ends, this is not a spoiler because this is, well, I already spoiled the book, but you should read the book anyways. It's when she returns to Sirius. She's disincarnated. She's received by an amazing assembly of spirits who are playing in a beautiful orchestra, chorus, sounds, these melodies. And she's taken back to Sirius. And the mentor that granted her authorization to reincarnate, who lives in Sirius, begins to sing. And these are the last words of the book, the Sermon of the Mountain. Blessed are they that mourn or that are afflicted, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek and peace-loving, for they shall inherit the earth, not only this earth, right, but the earth of the future. Blessed are they that are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this ties with what Jesus was telling Peter as they're walking back home, right? The kingdom of heaven within our hearts. That's our first priority. And that's where the joy of giving comes from. So he continues to say exactly that to Peter in the book Good News. He said the kingdom of heaven within the heart must be the focus of our lives. Everything else is secondary. When he says that, guys, does it matter where we are physically? In a temple, in a church, in a center, in a discotheque, in a bar? It does not matter. And this is quite a statement. Because if the kingdom of God is within my heart, then we do as Jesus did. Jesus went to the parties, to the banquets, to the houses of the sinners, the taxpayers, to the feasts, sitting next to the people that were the most frowned upon in society. And he was having a great time. He wasn't there, what are you doing? No, he was there to fraternize. Of course, when asked, he would tell the answers and he would provide the teachings, but his inner state was never one of seriousness, bitterness, grief, remember? It was always one of joy, of celebration, of mercy. So, even in the Gospel according to Spiritism, there's a passage called The Individual and the World. And the Spirit even says a line, observe the parties of your day, even the frivolities, but do it with a sentiment that is going to sanctify, purify. So we go with that sense of joy, without judging. The way Peter judged, that was a worldly party. What does that mean? A worldly party. In Peter's eyes, that was a party where he only saw corruption, drunkenness, vice. Right? That was a worldly party in his eyes. Was that what Jesus was doing? Was that the feeling of the people in the party? Probably not, right? The worldly family is also subject to the imperatives of such realities. Have you ever thought, Peter, okay, so I skipped in the good news, I have to give a little explanation. The next day, Jesus goes to the lake and gives more teachings. And in this day of the lake that he's giving more teachings, he gives that teaching that says, if you love your father or your mother more than me, you're not worthy of me. If you love it, you're not worthy of me. So Peter's sitting there, imagine, Peter's sitting there the next day, and he's hearing this, he's perplexed. Like, wow, how does that connect? This guy is an inquisitive guy, you know. So that's where Peter's questions are coming from. So have you ever thought, the worldly family is also subject to the imperatives of such realities. Have you ever thought, Peter, of the supreme sacrifice of renunciation? He asks again. Peter, do you know what it is like, the joy of giving something to a friend? He asks, have you ever thought of the supreme sacrifice of renunciation? He's asking him to see if that's in his kingdom of God, in his heart there. Everyone knows how to preserve things. And I highlighted this for a purpose. But few know how to deprive themselves of them. In the building of the kingdom of God, there comes a moment of separation when it's necessary to learn to bear sincere detachment. Sincere detachment. Not Simon of Cyrene's, right? But sincere. Like, I do it with a sense of satisfaction. Everyone knows how to preserve. So this connects with the sense of us not wanting to change. Wanting to keep the status quo. Don't touch my routine. This is how I am. I know what I'm doing. It may not be great, but at least I'm familiar with it. Don't come with me with all these changes, right? How many of us stay stuck, crystallized, paralyzed in these behaviors, in these moments of our life? Because we are so afraid of change. So it's easy to preserve things, to keep them as we know. It's familiar. But few know how to deprive themselves of them in moments of change, in moments of transformation. In the Spirit's book, there's the law of progress, law of labor. There's also the law of destruction. And destruction, they say, it's a transformation, purification. Cycles come in and out, things change. We need to be able to detach from what we're familiar with to be able to keep going. In the building of the kingdom of God, always here, always inside of us, there comes a moment of separation when it's necessary to learn to bear sincere detachment. And those lessons are painful. And they are born in solitude many times. We may not have somebody to confide with. We may not have somebody that understands us, right? He says, very few know how to withstand slander, quip, or indifference because they want to dwell within their individual creations. Connects with this preserved things, right? They want to dwell within their individual creations. Like we create the cocoon of our thought forms and we stay in that And we sometimes only realize the thickness of that individual creations and thought forms when we come to the spirit world and there's no light anymore. Where's the sun? Where am I? I'm dwelling in a place of confusion because we want to dwell within our individual creations, closing their ears to the warnings from heaven to depart quietly. And he says the word quietly, right? Because it's easy to depart. We'll never be here. You wait for me. And then we enrage ourselves with rebelliousness, and all the fruits of the labor we have gotten up until that point, suddenly they're squashed, they're useless at the moment we lose our temper with anger, with with rebelliousness. Do you guys remember the book Jesus in the Home that has that passage of the 4 tests? And the man is tested with 4 tests because everyone thinks he's such a heavenly messenger, and they all pray for him to go back to heaven because he deserves it, he's such a nice guy. So they give him 4 tests. First one is need. So they deprive him of all these things so he can feel the test of poverty. And he doesn't get angry, he doesn't rebel. He makes a very solid effort to be totally detached and to continue doing his work and helping others. He passes that test. He gets the second test, which is, come on, guy, wealth. He's showered with fortune, money, possessions, and he continues to help other people with it. He does not let that get to his head. He doesn't hoard it. He continues to give to people through his wealth and build a lot of things as a result. He passes that test. What's the third one? That's a big one. Third test. Starts with a P. Power. And Jesus says in that passage in the Jesus Nome, that's one where most people fail. It's hard to go past that one. And as Abraham Lincoln says, any man can withstand adversity. But if you really want to test the true character of a man, give him power. Give him power. So this man is showered with authority positions and overseeing it's a bunch of situations. He continues to be an educator, to teach, to mentor, to receive people with his time, being generous with his giving. He passes. What's the fourth and final test? Which he fails. So out of left field, this one. Starts with an A. Right? What do we think? Guys, don't be shy. What do we think? What could it be? Anger. He is put in a situation with an employee of a lowly stature who begins to disclose a bunch of very confidential and uncomfortable things about the man in front of a bunch of people. He starts to get red. He starts to get tormented. He loses it and he begins to bark and scream and yell. And for 3 days, he couldn't recover his health because he was so drained. Thank you. Completely drained. And then it says, but by then it was too late. Right? So, because this is the thermometer of the heart. The power, the wealth, these things are external. But where it really gets to the root of it is when the anger comes. So to be able to depart quietly, not just here, but here and here, right? Wow, that's the challenge, right? But we're all going to get there. We're all going to succeed. We're all going to win it. And we do it every day in different areas of our life. And I think that's the important thing. Sometimes I get a little discouraged when we keep saying, like, we're so far away from it. We're so far away from it. That doesn't empower me when I hear this. No, I'm close. Regeneration's around the corner. I'll make it, Like, yes, we're going to do it together. With the joy of friendship, it helps, right? All right, he says, however, Peter, no one will transform themselves without learning how to renounce with joy. Not just renounce. Remember, Manuel says people confuse discipline with spiritual illumination. When Chico Xavier asks Emmanuel, what are the three most important things for me to be a good medium, right? To be a serious good medium. And Emmanuel answers what? Discipline, discipline, discipline. If I listen to that and I take my burden with vinegar in my heart, with bitterness, and I do all my obligations, but my aura, so to speak, is gray with resentment, with not acceptance, with an inner state of rebelliousness, am I really progressing in the kingdom of heaven that's in my heart? I'm doing external things. And I share something that I was thinking about earlier today. And this is not a generalization, but it's an example of something. I visited Jerusalem a couple of years ago, and one of the things that struck me the most about Jerusalem is when you go to the holy sites in the old city, the majority of the religious figures that were there to monitor the tourists and to watch and take care, they were so arrogant. So many of them, not all of them, but they were so rude, they were so bitter, didn't feel like they wanted to be there. And I'm like, guys, these are tourists. I'm feeling, they're coming from all over the world. These sites mean so much for them. And the interaction with a human being that represents their faith is so arid, so like you're moving cow. Like I was shocked by a few things that I saw in different religious leaders. I'm like, and then when I was reading this, I kind of thought to myself, I'm not generalizing here, but we've done this movement of not accepting the joy of the party, which is the gospel. We've done this movement of not being okay with it, of being afraid of succumbing to the joys of the party. And we've run to monasteries, to convents, to refuge for thousands of years. Many of us have done this after we've come to our senses, like the prodigal son comes to his senses and he goes back to the house of the Father. When we feel remorse, when we regret some of the excesses that we've done, and we say, okay, my spiritual nature needs to take over now. And in order for me to truly overcome myself, it's safer that I'm not exposed to these things, so I'm going to go to a convent, to a temple, to a place where I can isolate myself from the world, right? And I can really cultivate the kingdom of heaven within and work on the qualities of my spirit, contemplate God and worship God. Wonderful. For many people, these reincarnations were very valuable building blocks and opportunities to build solid foundations for their faith in the future. Amazing. But for many others, it has also been a cause for even more downfall, because running away from ourselves is not a very healthy way to get to know ourselves, right? So to be afraid of our ills, our vices, and our weaknesses is not a healthy way to get to know ourselves. In order to embrace ourselves, we really need to have the courage to face our fears and expose ourselves to the temptations. Jesus says, let us not fall into temptation, but deliver us from evil. It doesn't say, let us not don't expose ourselves to temptation. He doesn't say that. It's not, let us not fall. And if we do, deliver us from evil, meaning don't let our hearts be totally 100% convinced and satisfied that these temptations are the best, and I'm going to just surrender to the evil that this represents. That's what the Our Father prayer ends with. Let us not fall into temptation. And if we do, which we probably will, deliver us from evil. That's it. That's all the recommend. There's no need to have fear associated with that, right? Okay, I'm going off in a huge tangent here, so let me take a break. What do you guys think? Questions, comments?
Sometimes, like the first question that Peter had about, well, but isn't that wrong? And then, like, all that part about, like, the discipline, that we confuses our spiritual enlightenment with discipline. It reminds me that story about St. Francis, that they were fasting, and
Yes.
a priest in there had,
I
I'm
can't
too
do it
weak,
anymore, yeah.
I can't do it anymore. I need to eat. And then St. Francis could have said, no, you have to have discipline. You really need this. You need to continue fasting and all of that. But no, instead he he was like connecting with the person, saying, "Okay, I can understand that. I will cook something for us to eat." And then he ate with the person, which is like, yes, of course they should continue to keep doing it, but he could recognize that, okay, I'm gonna renounce my fasting right now,
Right.
and love this guy, right? So I remember that part.
Because he felt he was a friend, right? And the joy of giving something to that friend at that moment was so more important than his continual fasting, right? Totally. It's a great example, for sure. And also, it reminds me of this more Eastern understanding of being flexible like water, you know, to take the shape of the recipient like water does, and it's flexible, it gets to the root of things. You know, have our purpose, have our core values firmly intact, but also be flexible so that we're not acting like the paternal figure of condemnation, because the Father doesn't do that. Jesus doesn't do that. Why should we do that, right? So I love this photo too, because for me, a healthy spirit, and we are all healthy spirits because we have moments of health and then moments of not so much health, and we oscillate back and forth. We sometimes have to go to the hospital, then we get discharged, then we come out, you know, right, Monica? Spiritually speaking as well. But when we are in those moments of spiritual health, I think the kingdom of God within our hearts resembles something like this, where we are interacting with each other unarmed, recognizing the purity of all the people around me as children of God, just seeing the God within them as I see it in myself, and then I have no fear. I spontaneously interact without any fear, tranquil, serene, right? We're almost done. So we do face the betrayals, we do face the slander, we do face the issues, right? And I think this is a very healing sort of photo to take us to the next part of what he says here. Nobody in the world, this is Humberto de Campos, actually, at the end. He concludes the narrative of what happened that day, and then this is the first chapter so far that Humberto de Campos actually gives a postscript, like a editor's note in the end, you know, commentary of his own to further emphasize the teaching. And he says, nobody in the world, oy, what did I do? Sorry. Here we go. Nobody in the world has managed to highlight, as the Lord has done, the beauty and breadth of the bonds of affection. It's that simple, right? He broke all the rules of the society that were rigid when necessary in order to prove the points of the bonds of affection and brotherhood and sisterhood, right? And to teach. This is because the essence of his work is to unite in love all nations and all people in the divine circle of the universal family. Also demonstrating that the kingdom of God should be the first concern of the souls. Nobody like him knew how to withdraw from positions at the appropriate time, obeying the divine plan. He had a firm understanding of the divine plan. His conscience was fully awake. We have our conscience as well, where the laws of God are written, and we know. We listen to the voice of our conscience. We know what we're supposed to do, right? Many times we choose to ignore, or we are too distracted to discern it, but it's always there. Now, to know how to withdraw with that renunciation of joy, I think that's key. Not just renunciation, but renunciation with inner joy. That changes the whole approach to the word renunciation, which we often associate with something like, okay, you know, a droopy face and inner sadness and sort of a grieving. And I think those are natural, right? We can't expect to say, okay, and then joyfully, because then either there's something wrong with us, or we're like euphorically, there's something psychologically not right. But to not let that linger, to not let that inner sense of something has died and I need to grieve and it's painful and I feel resentment, not let that linger. And as much as possible, reconnect with those moments of joy, those memories that I had with the person or the situation that brought me the enthusiasm, the celebration of life, so that I can heal through it, right? He says, however, Jesus teaches everyone in that supreme hour, the supreme hour of his crucifixion, the sublime virtue of withdrawing in human solitude while being in God's protection. So there are moments when we do need to withdraw from the world, right? In order to reassess, in order to do some inner inventory. When the Spirit's answer, know thyself, is one of the best ways to overcome our struggles. They said, a sage once says, know thyself, and Kardec's not happy, and he says, but how? And St. Augustine gives that beautiful exercise of, before you go to sleep, do an assessment of your day, find out where you've transgressed, relive it, and ask for in prayer so that the next day you can have the wisdom, the awareness to correct, right? Today we have psychology, guys. We have these amazing self-help books. Business leaders, coaches are out there, that are working side by side with the gospel. When Jesus says, when two or more are there when two or more gather in my name, I will be there. They don't need to evoke the name of Jesus for the Christ consciousness to be present. In any useful activity, the law of labor in the Spirit's book says, any useful activity that is helping other people is a useful activity, is we're doing the work of God. We're doing the work for ourselves. We're growing spiritually, right? So, I don't know why I said all these things, but maybe there's a... However, Jesus teaches everyone the sublime virtue of withdrawing. In human solitude, going back within ourselves to reassess, to get to know ourselves, while being in God's protection. At the moment of Calvary, Jesus crosses the streets of Jerusalem as if he were before the whole humanity, teaching the virtue of renunciation for the sake of the kingdom of God, disclosing his final lesson. So it's almost like his entire ministry was from water to wine, from wine to vinegar, and still tasting the joy of the wine, even through the vinegar. Right? Comments? Questions? Do you guys resonate? Does it apply to our lives? How? We opened on Happy Life earlier today, and this lesson felt so appropriate for this lecture that I'm going to read for us. It says the following: make sure that pessimism and rebelliousness do not find shelter in your heart, numbing or frazzling your nerves. Reconsider unpleasant attitudes and events, taking heart, meaning take heart, and continuing on your journey in peace. Your spiritual state has everything to do with the outcome of your aspirations and actions. Your spiritual state has everything to do with the outcome of your aspirations and actions. I mean, Joana de Angelis is the eminent psychologist, right? When you begin a task, any task, with antagonistic feelings or resistance, you have already lost. Wow. In other words, do only what you feel like doing. Seriously. Does that mean neglect my duties and obligations? No. Feel like doing those too. How do we make ourselves feel like doing those with the same joy as the things that we want to do, right? Because that determines the outcome of anything, the aspirations and actions. When you begin a task with antagonistic feelings or resistance, you have already lost. Bring the warmth of hope and optimism to all that you do, and success will be inevitable. Not success will be likely, will be probable, inevitable. You'll be successful when we bring the warmth of hope. What did he say? The warmth of hope and optimism. Optimism versus pessimism, right? That's something for us in vigilance. When Jesus says watch and pray, we focus sometimes a lot on pray, but the watch part is to check within ourselves. Am I being pessimistic? Why am I thinking? How am I feeling? Asking ourselves out loud these things so that we can be more aware of our emotional state and make sure we're not falling into pessimism or just seeing pain and suffering, just seeing discouragement, just seeing a hopelessness all around. Because it is very easy in this planet that we live right now, with all this bombardment of technology, to get into that pessimistic and hopeless way. Let's go back to that party. And when I say this, I also mean we live in a 37 square mile island that is considered by many the party central of the world. Do we look at it? Do you feel that these are worldly parties or spiritual banquets? We can go out here today and just feel that our spiritual parties, banquets, the one that Jesus turns water into wine, happening all over this city, which there are. Friends are getting together from all over the world. Tourists and families are coming from all over the world to experience the joy of Broadway, to the joy of museums, the joy of the park, culture, restaurants. People are rejoicing here. They're coming here to have such a great time in a spiritual way. And how often do we just look at, oh my God, it's just too much. It's New York. I am guilty of that too. Oh my God, it's just so heavy there, and so many people, it's so negative. Oh my God. Is that the Simon Peter we want to be inside of us? That's being our own worst enemy. Or do we want to see all the opportunity, the potential, the joy, the victories, the triumphs that happen in this island? The most enlightened minds of the world are in this island today, thinking of the new ways to do business, to new ways to solve problems, the economy, in every area of human achievement. The biggest, brightest, best ideas are being cultivated here. Other places too, but this island that we live in, do we feel like we're a part of this joyful party? Or do we isolate ourselves even when we walk in the subway and do all the things? We don't have to go to a monastery, but do we isolate ourselves out of fear, out of some kind of pessimism? Or do we feel like we're a part of this? We belong here and we can contribute. We can extend our light and be in this friendship with other people out there, right? That's my recommendation for us as a center, to not be so isolated like a little island inside an island, but really reach out to the community in the new year in ways that can be constructive, right? I'll end with this beautiful moment here, which is for us to look at the animals specifically around the manger and look at their state of having that peaceful resignation, that silent, calm acceptance that recognizes the Christ within, right? The Christ being born in the middle, and are not rebelliously there, right? The animals can't fake it. They'll bite. But the animals in us, the parts of our animal nature that are still ferocious, that are still rebellious, how can we allow the Christ within to overtake the animal nature so that all of them can learn to renounce with joy and be appeased? Thank you.